Just sign here, Grandma. She asked Hell's Angels for help, and they changed her life. The pen hovered over the signature line like it weighed a pound. Across the booth, Darren kept smiling, soft, patient, rehearsed, while his thumb tapped the corner of the folder. Just sign here, Grandma, he whispered, as if he was helping her with a crossword. Margaret stared at the page. She didn't understand every sentence, but 3 words were clear enough to make her stomach tighten. Durable power of attorney. Read it, she said, buying time. You don't need to read it, Darren replied. It's just paperwork so I can manage things, the bank, bills. You've been forgetting stuff. I've been forgetting where I put my glasses, Margaret said. Her fingers trembled around the pen. Not who owns my house. Darren's smile didn't move, but his eyes did, toward the front counter, where a man in a windbreaker stood with a paper cup, pretending not to look their way. The man had looked up the second Margaret hesitated. Margaret's throat went dry. This wasn't a family visit. It was an appointment. Where's the notary? She asked. Outside, Darren said quickly. She'll come in when you're ready. And I asked Mr. Henley to witness. Routine. Routine. A notary waiting in the parking lot. A witness already positioned. A folder prepared. A quiet corner booth. Margaret set the pen down, slowly, carefully. Like if she moved too fast, she might lose control of her own hands. I want my lawyer, she said. Darren's face shifted, just for a blink. Then the smile returned, thinner now. Grandma, you don't need to make this hard. I already talked to someone. This protects you. Protects you? The words sounded clean, like soap. Margaret had heard them for months, always attached to something that made her smaller. Give me your card, I'll get your groceries, I'll keep a spare key, stop driving, it's safer. She pushed the folder back. I'm not signing anything today. The smile stayed. The warmth didn't. Okay, Darren murmured, leaning in so only she could hear. Then we'll do it the hard way. What does that mean? It means I call Adult Protective Services like I told you, Darren said, voice calm, almost bored. I tell them you're confused, refusing help, a danger to yourself. Then we won't be in a diner, Grandma. We'll be in front of someone who can make decisions for you. He said it like he was describing a process he'd already started. She looked around. The waitress was refilling mugs, eyes down. 2 older men argued quietly over the newspaper. Nobody wanted to touch family business. In a town like this, you didn't get involved unless you wanted trouble to follow you home. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you are watching this from, because in a lot of places, the last thing a person has is a public room where someone else can hear them say no. Her eyes drifted to the back booth, the one everyone avoided. 4 men sat there in patched vests, their helmets stacked beside them like a row of sleeping animals. They weren't whispering or showing off. They were just there, heavy and quiet, taking up space without asking permission. Margaret recognized the winged skull on one vest, even if she wished she didn't. Hell's Angels. Darren followed her gaze and let out a low, amused breath. Don't even think about that, he murmured. Those guys? That's who you want to run to? Margaret didn't answer. She reached for her purse. Darren's hand landed on the strap, light, possessive. Where are you going? Margaret stared at his fingers like they belonged to a stranger. Let go, she said. His eyes flicked around the diner. He released the strap and forced a laugh. Fine, go to the bathroom. Take your time. Margaret stood anyway, knees stiff, and walked, past the counter, past the booths, straight toward the table Darren thought she was too scared to approach. At the back booth, all 4 men turned their heads at once. Up close, they were bigger than she expected, not in a cartoon way, just real, solid, like they'd lived in wind and noise for a long time. One had a scar at the corner of his mouth that made him look like he was always half smiling. Margaret stopped beside the booth and felt her mouth go dry. She almost turned around. Instead, she cleared her throat. Excuse me, she said. The man with the scar looked her over, not rude, just measuring. Ma'am? Margaret gripped her purse with both hands. I don't know how to ask this without sounding crazy, she said, but I need help. That got their full attention, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The oldest one, gray beard, steady eyes, set his coffee down. What kind of help? He asked. Margaret kept her voice low, but not whispering. Whispering was what Darren wanted. My nephew is trying to make me sign power of attorney paperwork, she said. He has a notary outside. He has a witness inside. And he just told me if I don't sign, he'll have me declared incompetent. The gray-bearded man didn't react like she'd expected. No jokes, no tough guy grin. Just a small nod, as if he'd heard that story before. You got anyone with you? He asked. No, Margaret said. The word came out sharper than she meant. That's the point. He glanced at the others. A quick exchange of looks, silent agreement. What's your name? He asked. Margaret? I'm Vic, he said. You don't want trouble? I don't want violence, Margaret said immediately. I'm not asking you to hurt him. I'm asking you to sit with me. Just sit there, so I'm not alone. So he can't corner me and lower his voice and pretend I agreed. Vic watched her for a second longer, then slid out of the booth in one smooth motion. No swagger, no performance. Just decision. All right, he said. We'll sit. The other three stood with him. Chairs scraped. The air in the diner changed. The man in the windbreaker at the counter shifted his weight, suddenly unsure if he still belonged there. Vic gestured with his chin. Lead. Margaret walked back down the aisle with them behind her, not because they told her to, because her legs felt steady for the first time all morning. She wanted Darren to see exactly what she'd done. At her booth, Margaret didn't slide into her old seat. She moved to the inside, back against the wall, so nobody could trap her with a hand on her purse again. Vic sat on the outside, between her and the aisle. Two of the others took the neighboring table like they'd been there all day. The fourth angled his chair so he could see the front door, the counter, and Darren at the same time. Darren stared at them, then at Margaret, like the script in his head had just been ripped apart. What is this? He said, loud enough that the waitress definitely heard. Margaret lifted her chin. This is me not being alone. Darren laughed once, sharp and fake. Grandma, are you serious? You're bringing bikers into this? Vic didn't look at Darren. He looked at Margaret. He your nephew? He asked, as if Darren was a stranger trying to claim something. Yes, Margaret said. You want him here? Vic asked. The question was simple. The power inside it wasn't. Margaret looked at Darren, really looked. Neat hair, clean jacket, that controlled voice that turned icy the second nobody else could hear. The way his eyes kept flicking to the counter like he was counting the witness, counting the waitress, counting the exits. I want him to hear me, Margaret said, and I want other people to hear him. Vic finally turned to Darren, calm, level, not a threat, something worse for a man like Darren, attention. All right, Vic said, then talk. Darren straightened like he could reset the moment by sitting up taller. This is private, he said. It's a family matter. Vic's gaze didn't change. Then you won't mind saying it clearly, he replied, voice even. What are you asking her to sign? Darren's eyes flashed. She's confused. She needs help. She asked me to— I didn't, Margaret cut in. Her heart was pounding, but the words came clean. I asked you to stop. A beat of silence spread out across the diner, thin and sharp. Vic nodded once, almost to himself. Power of attorney? He asked. Darren hesitated half a second too long. It's standard, he said, so I can handle her accounts. Keep her safe. Vic reached 2 fingers toward the folder, not grabbing, just indicating it. Show her the page that says what rights she's giving up. Darren pulled the folder back. Absolutely not, you have no right. Then she has no reason, Vic said, still calm, to put her name on anything you won't let her read out loud. Darren's fingers tapped the folder faster now. The man at the counter, Mr. Henley, stared at his cup like he wished he could disappear into it. Through the window, Margaret saw a woman step out of a car in the parking lot with a small stamp case in her hand. She headed for the diner door like she was right on schedule. Darren saw her too. His hand reached for the pen again and slid it across the table, straight toward Margaret, like the world hadn't changed at all. The diner door swung open again, letting in a hard breath of cold air. A woman stepped inside with a small black stamp case in her hand. Mid-40s, tight bun, blazer that tried to look official. She didn't glance at the pie rack or the menu board. Her eyes went straight to Darren like she'd been told exactly where to find him. Then she saw the vests. Her pace faltered for half a second. She recovered fast and walked over anyway, shoulders squared the way people do when they're trying not to show fear. Darren? She asked. Darren shot up so quickly his knee knocked the table. Yeah, Cheryl. Perfect timing. Margaret watched him reach for the folder and pen like muscle memory. Vic didn't move. He stayed seated on the outside of the booth, not blocking the aisle, just existing in it. Darren had to lean around him to keep the script going. Cheryl stopped at the end of the booth. Her smile was tight. "I'm here to notarize a signature," she said, looking anywhere but at the patches. "I don't get involved in family disagreements." "You won't have to," Darren said too fast. "Grandma understands. She's just—" "I'm refusing," Margaret said. The word landed cleanly, loud enough for the waitress to hear without trying. Cheryl blinked. "Ma'am, if you're refusing, I can't—" "She's confused," Darren cut in. "That's why we're doing this. She forgets things. She needs help." Vic lifted one finger toward the air. Not a threat. A pause button. "Let her speak," he said. Darren's eyes snapped to Vic. "Who are you?" Vic ignored him and looked at Cheryl. "County Commission Notary?" he asked. Cheryl's chin lifted. "Yes." "Then you know the rule," Vic said. "No free will, no stamp." Cheryl's jaw tightened. "Correct." Darren tried to laugh it off. "She is willing. She just gets dramatic." Margaret pulled the folder closer. "I want it in my hands," she said, "and I want to read it out loud." Darren hesitated like that request physically hurt him. Then he slid the folder toward her with 2 fingers, as if it was dirty. Margaret opened to the first page and forced herself to breathe. "I, Margaret Louise Carter, hereby appoint Darren Michael Carter as my attorney. In fact—" Darren shifted, the small warning movement he always used when nobody else was watching. Margaret kept reading anyway, slower now, making every word public. "With full authority to act in my place, including but not limited to the power to sell, convey, transfer, mortgage." Her throat tightened. "That means my house," she said, looking up. "It's standard wording," Darren said, voice smooth. "It doesn't mean I'll—" "It means you can," Margaret said louder for the room. "You can sell my house." The waitress froze with a coffee pot in her hand. 2 booths away, one of the older men lowered his newspaper. At the counter, Mr. Henley's cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Vic tapped the page with one knuckle. "Keep going," he told Margaret. Margaret turned the page. "We're to access all financial accounts, to withdraw funds—" A sharp memory flashed through her. Missing statements Darren said the bank forgot to mail. The ATM receipts he dismissed as errors. The way he'd started buying groceries, and somehow she'd started running out of money. She swallowed and continued. Then she hit a section header that made her hands go cold. Healthcare decisions. How to consent to medical treatment, select care facilities, and authorize placement. Placement. Margaret stared at the line until the letters blurred. "This lets you choose where I live," she said. Darren's smile didn't reach his eyes. "It lets me help you." "It lets you lock me away," Margaret said. Cheryl shifted her feet. "Ma'am," she asked carefully, "are you willing to sign this document of your own free will?" Margaret didn't look at Darren. "No," Cheryl exhaled, sharp and final. "Then I cannot notarize." Darren's face hardened. "Cheryl, come on, we talked about this." Cheryl's voice went firm. "I'm not stamping a document when the signer is refusing." Darren's hand slapped the table. Coffee jumped. The sound pulled heads from the entire diner. "Fine," Darren hissed, then forced his expression back into something polite. "Then we do it Monday." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "What's Monday?" Darren froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for everyone to see he hadn't meant to say that out loud. Vic leaned back, letting Darren hang himself with his own words. "What's Monday?" Vic repeated calmly. "It's nothing," Darren said quickly. "An appointment." "With who?" Margaret pressed. Darren tried to smile again, but it came out like a grimace. "Grandma, don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Answer her," Vic said. Darren's gaze cut toward the counter, toward Mr. Henley, like he was checking who still belonged to him. Then he looked back at Margaret and switched into the tone he used when he wanted the world to treat her like a problem. "She's been having episodes," Darren said. "Wandering, calling me at night, not knowing where she is. I'm trying to keep her safe." Margaret's stomach twisted. "That never happened." Darren nodded slowly, the perfect performance of patience. "See?" The lie was so smooth it almost made Margaret doubt herself for a heartbeat. That was Darren's gift. He didn't need to hit you. He just needed you to feel crazy. Vic turned slightly toward Margaret. "That folder yours?" he asked. Yes, Margaret said. You got a phone? Vic asked. Margaret fumbled her old smartphone out of her purse. Vic held out his hand. May I? She gave it to him and he angled the camera over the pages while Margaret held them flat. Click, click, click. Photos of the clauses Darren didn't want anyone to read aloud. Darren's eyes flared. Stop. You can't. It's her document, Vic said, handing the phone back. And it's her phone. Cheryl took a step away from the booth. I'm leaving, she said, snapping her stamp case shut. Darren turned toward her like he could still control the room with pressure. You can't just walk out. Cheryl looked him dead in the face. Watch me. She walked to the door. The silent biker angled toward the exit didn't move to block her. He didn't have to. He just stayed there, eyes steady, making the space feel watched. Cheryl pushed outside into daylight. The second the door shut, Darren leaned toward Margaret, voice dropping into the private blade he liked best. You think they're going to protect you? He whispered. They'll leave, and then it'll be you and me again. Margaret's chest tightened because the fear behind the words was real. People did leave. They always left. Vic heard him anyway. We don't have to be your family, Vic said evenly. We just have to make sure you can't corner her. Darren straightened, jaw working. I can call the cops, he said, louder now for the diner, and tell them you're harassing my grandmother. Vic nodded once. Call. Darren hesitated like he expected fear. When he didn't get it, he pulled his phone out, fingers jerky, and dialed. Yeah, Darren said, forcing a shaky, innocent tone. I need an officer at Rosie's Diner on Mill Road. There are bikers threatening my grandmother. She's elderly. They won't let us leave. Margaret felt the lie hit like a slap. Her mouth opened, but Vic's hand lifted gently again, stopping her from chasing him into his story. Let him, Vic murmured. You'll talk to them first. Darren hung up and slid the phone into his pocket with a thin smile. There, he said softly. Now we wait. The waitress moved closer, no longer pretending she hadn't heard. She set her coffee pot down and grabbed a receipt pad from her apron. Her pen started moving fast. Mr. Henley finally stood up from his stool, face pale. He took one slow step toward the booth. Darren, he said quietly, maybe you should just let her talk to a lawyer first. Darren's eyes narrowed. Sit down. Mr. Henley flinched but didn't sit. The diner felt like it was holding its breath. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, then closer. Then the door opened and a uniform stepped in, scanning the room with a hand resting near his belt. Darren's shoulders eased like rescue had arrived. Margaret's grip tightened on the folder until her knuckles burned, and she stood up before Darren could open his mouth. The officer's eyes swept the room. What's going on? Darren stepped forward, palms open. These bikers are threatening my grandmother? I'm not afraid of them, Margaret cut in, lifting the folder. I'm afraid of him. He tried to force me to sign power of attorney papers. A notary just refused to stamp because I said no. The officer's gaze locked on Darren. You had a notary here? Darren hesitated a beat too long. The waitress raised her receipt pad. I wrote down what I heard, she said. The officer held up a hand. Ma'am, he asked Margaret, do you want to leave with him? Margaret's answer came fast. No, I want to go home without signing anything. The officer didn't rush in like a hero. He did what cops do when they walk into a room full of conflicting stories. He got still. His eyes moved once over the patches, then over Margaret's white-knuckled grip on the folder, then to Darren's open palms and practiced concern. Everyone stay where you are, he said, voice controlled. Let's start with names. Darren spoke first, like he'd been waiting for that line his whole life. Darren Carter, that's my grandmother, Margaret Carter. Those guys, he nodded toward Vic without looking at him directly, are harassing her. The officer looked at Margaret. Ma'am? Margaret swallowed. The pen was still on the table like a trap. Margaret Carter, she said, and he tried to force me to sign a power of attorney document. A notary came in, asked if I was signing willingly, and I said no. She left. The officer's gaze sharpened. You had a notary physically here in the diner? Yes, Margaret said, holding the folder up. She had a stamp case. The officer turned his head toward Darren. Is that accurate? Darren's mouth twitched. He chose his words carefully. She overreacted. My grandma gets confused. She asked me to help manage her bills. We came here because it's public. I thought that would make her comfortable. Margaret almost laughed, because it wasn't public to make her comfortable. It was public, so she'd be embarrassed to say no. Vic didn't jump in. He didn't argue. He let Darren talk, because Darren couldn't resist adding details. The officer asked, "What was the notary's name?" Darren blinked. "Cheryl. Cheryl something." You hired a notary and don't know her last name?" the officer asked. Darren's face tightened. "It was arranged, through a service." The waitress stepped closer, receipt pad still in her hand. She didn't look at the bikers now. She looked at the officer like she'd chosen a side without meaning to. "I heard him tell her to sign," she said, voice shaky but clear. "I heard her say she didn't want to, and I heard him say he was going to call some agency and get her declared incompetent." The officer's eyes moved to her. "You're willing to put that in writing?" She held up the pad. "I already wrote it down." Darren turned his head slowly. "Rosie." The waitress flinched at her own name. The officer caught it. "Sir," the officer said to Darren, "I'm going to ask you to step away from the booth." Darren spread his hands again, still performing. "Of course, I'm just trying to keep her safe." "Step away," the officer repeated, less patient. Darren moved 2 steps back. Not far, just enough to keep control in reach. The officer leaned closer to Margaret. His voice dropped, not threatening, just private enough to feel human. "Ma'am, do you understand what a power of attorney does?" Margaret nodded. "It gives him control." "Control over what?" the officer asked. Margaret lifted the document. "My bank accounts, my house, my medical decisions. It says he can authorize placement. It says he can transfer property." The officer held out his hand. "Can I see it?" Margaret glanced at Vic like she was asking permission she shouldn't need. Vic gave a small nod. She handed it over. The officer flipped the pages, scanning, not reading every line, looking for titles, sections, signatures. Then he paused on the notary block at the end, even though it was blank. His brow furrowed. He looked up. "This is already prepared for notarization." "It was supposed to happen 5 minutes ago," Margaret said. Darren cut in fast. "Because she agreed earlier, at home. She asked me to set it up." "No," Margaret said. "I didn't." The officer's eyes stayed on Darren. "Do you have any existing POA on file?" Darren hesitated. "Not yet. That's what this is." "Any medical paperwork? Guardianship petition filed?" the officer asked. Darren's smile tried to come back. "Not petition, but we have a doctor's letter about her mental state." Margaret's stomach dropped. "What letter?" Darren's eyes slid to her, and there it was. Enjoyment. The moment he'd been saving. "I didn't want to upset you," Darren said softly. "But her doctor thinks she's declining." Margaret felt heat rise into her face. "Who is my doctor, Darren?" He hesitated again. "Doctor, it doesn't matter." "It matters," Margaret snapped. "Name him." Darren's voice tightened. "He's a specialist." Vic finally spoke, not loud. "You got that letter on you?" he asked Darren. Darren's head whipped toward him. "This is none of your business," the officer cut in. "Sir, if you're claiming she's incompetent and using that claim to justify legal paperwork, it becomes my business the moment you call and say someone's threatening her." Darren's nostrils flared. He reached into the folder, pulled out a second sheet, and slapped it down on the table like a winning card. Margaret leaned forward. Her eyes scanned the top. A letterhead. A clinic name she didn't recognize. A paragraph full of words that sounded medical without being personal. And at the bottom, an unreadable signature. "I've never seen this," she said, voice thin. Darren folded his arms. "Because you forget things." Margaret felt her breath shorten, because that line, said in public, was designed to make everyone believe him. Vic leaned in slightly, eyes on the letterhead. "What clinic is that?" he asked. Darren didn't answer. He didn't want to give the name weight. The officer read it, then looked up. "Where's this clinic located?" Darren's jaw clenched. "Out of town." "What town?" the officer asked. Darren's eyes flicked once toward the window, toward the parking lot, like he was checking if Cheryl was still out there. "South." The officer's patience thinned. "South is not a town." Darren threw his hands out. "Look, I don't carry addresses in my head. I'm doing my best." Vic reached into his own pocket slowly, like a man asking permission by moving carefully. He pulled out his phone, not pointing it at anyone yet. "Mind if I look it up?" Vic asked the officer, not Darren. The officer gave a short nod. "Go ahead." Darren's face tightened. "You can't just—" Vic typed the clinic name into his phone. His thumb moved steady, not hurried. Margaret watched Darren's expression change in real time. The confident script was slipping. His eyes weren't angry yet. They were calculating. Vic looked up. "Nothing," he said. "No address, no listing, no website, nothing on maps." Darren scoffed. "Maybe it's new." Vic didn't argue. He scrolled. "Maybe," he agreed. "Or maybe it doesn't exist." That quiet statement hung in the air like smoke. The waitress stopped writing. Mr. Henley's lips parted like he wanted to speak but couldn't. The officer took the letter again, looking harder now. "What's the doctor's name?" he asked. Darren's voice went sharp. "You're not a judge." "No," the officer said evenly. "But you called me here. You said she was being threatened, and now you're showing me paperwork that claims she's not competent. I need to know if you're trying to coerce her into signing something she doesn't understand." Margaret's hands were shaking again, but the fear had changed shape. It wasn't helpless fear. It was fury. Darren leaned forward. "She does understand," he said, voice raising. "She's just being manipulated by—" "Stop," the officer said. "One word. Firm." Darren froze. The officer turned to Margaret. "Ma'am, do you feel threatened by anyone at this table?" Margaret met his eyes. "By him," she said, pointing at Darren. "Not by them." The officer nodded once, as if something clicked into place. "Do you want to leave with him?" "No." "Do you want him to leave you alone right now?" the officer asked. "Yes." Darren laughed, brittle. "Are you kidding? I'm her family. I have a key to her house." Margaret's chest tightened. "Give it back." Darren's smile returned, colder. "No." Vic's head tilted slightly, as if hearing something in that word that other people missed. He didn't stare at Darren like prey. He stared at him like a man reading a bill. The officer looked at Darren. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step outside with me." Darren shook his head. "No, I want to stay with my grandmother." "She doesn't want you with her," the officer said. "Outside, now." Darren's eyes darted, once to the biker at the neighboring table, once to the waitress, once to Mr. Henley, counting again. He stood slowly, as if moving too fast would make him look guilty. The officer guided him toward the door, not touching him, just directing him with presence. As soon as Darren was out of earshot, Margaret exhaled like she'd been underwater. The officer leaned back in toward her. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "do you have anyone else you trust? A friend, a neighbor, another relative?" Margaret's throat tightened. "I don't," she admitted. He made sure of that. Vic's eyes didn't soften dramatically. They stayed steady. "Where do you live?" he asked. Margaret blinked. "Why?" "Because if he's got a key," Vic said, voice level, "and he thinks he's losing, he's not going to go home and calm down. He's going to go home and take what he can." Margaret felt a cold wave wash through her. Not theory, truth. Darren wasn't here for paperwork. He was here for control. The officer came back in, jaw tight. He looked at Margaret like he'd already decided something. "He says you've been wandering and forgetting," the officer said. "He says APS is involved." Margaret stared. "Is it?" The officer shook his head. "Not through him, not that I can confirm. But I'm telling you this straight. If you're competent, you need your own attorney, and you need to lock your accounts down before he does something." Vic nodded once like that was exactly what he'd expected. "We can get her to an attorney," Vic said. The officer's eyes flicked to the patches, then back to Vic. "I'm not endorsing anything," he said carefully. "But I am telling you, ma'am, don't be alone with him today." Margaret's mouth went dry again. "I have to go home," she said. "My medicine is there. My papers." Vic's voice stayed calm. "Then we don't make it a fight," he said. "We make it a daylight walk." The officer looked at Margaret. "If you want, I can do a civil standby while you return home," he said. "Make sure you get inside safely. After that, you need to change locks, immediately." Margaret swallowed. "Yes," she said. "Please." Outside the window, Darren stood near his car, phone pressed to his ear now, talking fast. His head turned once toward the diner like he could see through glass and measure exactly how much time he had left. Margaret watched him, heart thudding, and realized something she hadn't wanted to admit when she walked over to the back booth. This wasn't going to end with a refused signature. This was going to end with Darren trying something else. The officer didn't ask if anyone was okay. He asked what mattered. Civil standby, he said. We go to your residence, you collect what you need, and we keep it calm. Nobody argues in a doorway. Nobody reaches for anything. Darren was outside by his car, phone at his ear, talking fast and smiling too hard. Vic stayed beside Margaret while she stuffed the POA folder into her purse. You got your keys? Vic asked. Margaret patted her coat pocket, then stopped. He has my key ring. The officer came back in. He says he's going to wait at your place, says he needs to check your meds. Margaret's stomach dropped. My meds are fine. Where are your important papers? The officer asked. Lockbox, hall closet. Vic nodded once. Then we move like he's already there. Ma'am, you ride with me, the officer said. They follow. Break. Darren turned the second he saw Margaret heading out with the uniform. Officer, thank God, Darren said. She's confused. These bikers are scaring her. Ma'am is going home, the officer replied. You're not riding with us. I have to. I'm her family. She said she doesn't want you with her, the officer said. You can follow in your own vehicle. You will keep distance. For a heartbeat, Darren's eyes went hard. Then the smile snapped back. Of course. I just want her safe. Margaret climbed into the patrol car. In the mirror, she watched Darren pull out behind them, just close enough to count. Brake. The officer drove like he didn't believe in shortcuts. How long has he been handling your money? He asked. Since my husband died, Margaret said. The officer nodded once. And today he tried to get you to sign power of attorney in public. That's not protection. That's control. Margaret swallowed. Hearing it said like that made it real in a way her own thoughts hadn't. Her street came into view, and Darren's car was already in her driveway. Margaret's voice went thin. How did he beat us? He peeled off earlier, the officer said. He wasn't following you. He was racing you. The officer parked behind Darren's car, blocking it in. The Angels rolled up seconds later and lined the curb, engines low, vests quiet in the winter air. Stay behind me, the officer told Margaret. They climbed her steps. The porch light was on in daylight. Margaret had turned it off when she left. The officer knocked. Darren, open the door. From inside, a thump, then quick footsteps. The door opened a crack. Darren's face filled it, breath a little fast. Officer, he said, smiling too quickly. I was just checking her medications. What are you doing in her home? The officer asked. I have a key. I'm family. Do you have permission? The officer asked. Darren glanced past him at Margaret. She gave it to me. I want you out of my house, Margaret said. Darren's smile tightened. Grandma, don't do this. She's revoking permission, the officer said. Step outside. Darren didn't move until the officer repeated it, colder. Then he stepped onto the porch, still trying to run the story. She's not well, Darren said. She refuses care. I was about to call medical transport. Keys, the officer said. Darren laughed once. You can't. Hand them over, the officer cut in. Now. Darren stared, calculating, then pulled out her key ring. Margaret recognized the house key, the mailbox key, the little brass key to the lockbox, and one fresh key she'd never seen, shiny with a red tag. What is that? Margaret whispered. Darren's eyes flicked to it, then away. Nothing. The officer held his hand out until Darren dropped the ring into it with 2 fingers. Margaret took it back and walked inside without looking at him. Break. The living room smelled wrong, like Darren's cologne layered over her own air. The hall closet door stood open. I keep it right here, Margaret said, moving fast. The officer followed. Vic stayed on the threshold, not crossing into the house. Margaret yanked the lockbox down from the shelf. It was still there. Relief hit for half a second. Then she saw the scrape on the metal, the lid sitting crooked. Someone had pried at it. Her hands shook as she turned the key. It opened too easily. Inside, her folders were out of order. The neat stack of bank papers looked like it had been flipped through in a hurry. And the thick manila envelope she kept at the bottom, the deed copy, signature cards, the papers Darren would need, was gone. Margaret stared at the empty space until her eyes burned. From the porch, Darren's voice floated in, loud and sweet. Grandma, you're confused. You probably moved it. Margaret didn't answer. Her fingers traced the pry mark like it could tell her how long he'd been planning this. Then her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Once, twice, 3 times. She snatched it up and froze. Bank alert. Your online banking password was changed. Bank alert, a new email address was added. Bank alert, a transfer was initiated. No, Margaret whispered. The officer stepped in. Call the bank. Put it on speaker. Margaret fumbled the number. A menu, a click, a human voice. Fraud department, how can I help? This is Margaret Carter, she said, breathless. I didn't change anything. I didn't initiate a transfer. Freeze my accounts. The representative asked rapid questions. Margaret answered what she could, the officer feeding her calm prompts like a lifeline. Okay, the voice said. I see activity. A wire transfer was initiated to an escrow account 12 minutes ago. Do you authorize it? No. I'm placing an immediate hold, the representative said. Online access and outgoing transfers are restricted. Cards will be blocked. You'll need to come to a branch with ID. Margaret's knees almost gave out. Not relief, rage, the kind that makes you steady. Outside, Darren heard just enough to understand. What are you doing? He shouted. You're going to lock yourself out of your money. The officer stepped to the doorway. Sir, back up. Darren took a slow step down, still talking, still trying to keep his voice inside the house. They're turning you against me. Margaret's hands clenched around her phone. You did this, she said, loud enough for the street. Darren's eyes flashed. I was trying to save you. Margaret didn't argue. She moved. My checkbook, she said, heading down the hall. Her bedroom looked searched, drawer open, papers shifted, the small tin where she kept emergency cash sitting empty. The checkbook drawer was bare. The officer photographed it all, methodical, as if turning panic into evidence. On the floor by the closet, Margaret saw a clipped stack of pages that didn't belong there. Crisp, printed, official, purchase and sale agreement. She read her address at the top, parcel number, a closing date field already filled in. And there, in the middle, Darren listed as authorized agent. Margaret's throat tightened. He was selling my house, she said. The officer's eyes narrowed. Without your signature, he can't, he said, then glanced toward the front door. Unless he planned to get it. That was the diner. That was the notary. That was the witness. A knock sounded at the open doorway. Margaret, a woman's voice called. Honey, are you okay? Mrs. Alvarez from next door stood on the porch in slippers, eyes wide. I saw Darren here earlier, she blurted. He came with a man in a windbreaker and a little case. They were inside 20 minutes. I thought you were home. I'm sorry. The officer turned to her. Will you make a statement? Mrs. Alvarez nodded hard. Yes. From the driveway, Darren snapped, Mind your business, Maria. Mrs. Alvarez flinched. Vic didn't move from the threshold. He just turned his head enough for Darren to see he was being watched. Darren's mouth shut. Margaret looked down at her keyring again. That shiny key with the red tag caught the light, a key Darren hadn't bothered to hide because he didn't think she'd ever get it back. Margaret closed her fist around it until it hurt. Officer, she said, voice steady now, I want him trespassed. The officer nodded once and stepped onto the porch, posture straight, voice carrying. Darren Carter, he called, you are directed to leave this property immediately. If you return without permission, you will be arrested for trespassing. The officer turned back to Margaret, voice lower. Change your locks today. Go to the bank in person, and first thing tomorrow, get an emergency protective order. Don't let him get you alone again. Vic reached into his vest and slid a business card onto the entry table without stepping inside. Real attorney, he said. Local. You call? You say you're with Margaret. Darren's face twisted, irritation raw. He stared at Margaret like she'd stopped being his. This isn't over, he said low. Margaret met his eyes from inside her own doorway. It is, she said, and didn't blink. Margaret shut the door and slid the deadbolt home with both hands. The officer stood on the porch long enough to watch Darren's car roll out of sight at the end of the street. I'm filing a report for the coercion attempt in the bank activity, he said, but I can't stay here all day. I know, Margaret murmured, staring at the driveway as if Darren might reverse back in. You call 911 if he returns, the officer added, and you don't open the door for anyone claiming to be medical unless you called them yourself. Understood? Margaret nodded. The warning sounded oddly specific. Vic's voice stayed low. Locksmith, he said. Now, not later. Margaret turned. They're expensive. Vic didn't flinch. So's losing your house. She grabbed the landline and called the first locksmith number she found. Busy. The second picked up, then laughed when she asked for today. "Ma'am, it's Friday," the man said. "Maybe Tuesday." Margaret's throat tightened. "He has a key." A pause. "Where are you?" the locksmith asked. She gave the address. "I got a guy finishing up 2 streets over," he said. "He can swing by in an hour." Margaret exhaled so hard her ribs hurt. Vic tapped the entry table, where his attorney card sat like a lifeline. "Call him," he said. "Put him on speaker." Margaret dialed. It rang twice. "This is Will Barrett." "Mr. Barrett," Margaret said, voice thin. "My nephew tried to force me to sign power of attorney paperwork at a diner. A notary refused. He broke into my lockbox. He tried to initiate a wire transfer. The police were here." "I need help." Will Barrett's voice tightened. "Are you alone right now?" "No," Margaret said. "I have witnesses." "Good," he replied. "Do not sign anything. Do not speak to him without someone present. I want photos of the pry marks, the empty drawers, and any paperwork you found. If he returns, call the police, not me. And you're coming to my office today." "Today?" Margaret blurted. "Today," Barrett said. "And first, go to a branch in person with your ID to reverse any access changes." Margaret looked at Vic. Vic gave a small nod. Break. 10 minutes later, Margaret stood at her front window watching the street. Vic stayed by the doorway. 2 of the other men sat on the porch steps with their helmets beside them, talking quietly. The 4th remained at the curb, eyes on the road. Margaret couldn't stop thinking about the shiny key with the red tag. She turned it over in her palm and walked out onto the porch, scanning the railing. There it was. A small black box clipped to the porch rail, half hidden behind a hanging plant. A realtor's lockbox. Margaret's throat closed. Vic followed her gaze. "That yours?" he asked. "No," Margaret whispered. "I didn't." Her hand tightened around the red tag key. She slid it into the lockbox. It turned smoothly. The lid popped open. Inside was a spare house key, bright and new. Beside it, a business card with a smiling headshot and the words, Lindsay Kerr, Kerr Realty Group, and folded beneath the card a printed schedule titled Showing Window, Margaret Carter Residence. Margaret's vision tunneled. Vic didn't touch the papers. "Take a photo," he said. Margaret's hands shook so badly she almost dropped her phone. She managed the picture anyway. Lockbox, spare key, realtor card, showing schedule. This is like a burglary with a calendar," she whispered. Vic's jaw tightened. "It's not a burglary," he said. "It's a plan." Break. They moved like the attorney had instructed. Margaret grabbed her coat, her purse, the POA folder, and her ID. The officer had already left, but his warning kept echoing. "Don't open the door for anyone claiming to be medical unless you called them." She hadn't called anyone. Vic walked her to the car, then nodded to the 2 men on the steps. "Ride behind her. Lights on. No games." They nodded and stood. Margaret drove toward the bank with 2 bikes following at a respectful distance, not close enough to intimidate, close enough to be seen. At the first stoplight, she saw Darren's car on a side street, idling, angled like he'd been waiting for her route. Her stomach dropped. She kept driving. The bikes kept driving too, steady as metronomes. Darren pulled out and fell in behind them. Break. The bank lobby smelled like printer toner and winter coats. Margaret walked to the counter with her ID in hand and the fraud alerts open on her phone. A young teller took one look at her shaking hands and leaned forward. "Ma'am, what's going on?" "My online banking was changed," Margaret said. "I'm here in person. I need everything locked down, now." The teller's eyes flicked to the screen, then widened. "Okay, I'm going to get my manager." As the manager approached, the glass doors opened again. Darren walked in. Clean jacket, smooth hair, the same patient smile from the diner, like he'd been invited. He headed straight for the counter, stopping just behind Margaret's shoulder. "Grandma," he said, loud enough to sound concerned, quiet enough to feel like a hand around her throat. "There you are. I've been worried sick." Margaret didn't turn. She stared at the manager, forcing air into her lungs. The manager looked between them. "Can I help you, sir?" Darren smiled. "Yes. I'm Darren Carter. I'm here to assist my grandmother. She gets confused and sometimes makes panicked decisions that—" "Stop," Margaret said. "You do not speak for me." Darren's smile held. His eyes didn't. I have a letter, he said, reaching into his jacket. From her doctor. The manager's posture changed. Banks got careful around words like incompetent. Margaret felt herself slipping, that old panic rising. Vic stepped in beside her. He didn't address Darren. He addressed the manager. She's here in person with ID, Vic said evenly. Any changes must be confirmed by her, not him. The manager glanced at the vest, then back at Margaret. Ma'am, do you consent to him being involved with your banking today? No, Margaret said. Darren's smile cracked. You're being manipulated. Margaret looked at the manager. He changed my password and added a new email, she said. He broke into my lockbox at home. He tried to start a wire transfer. I want it documented and I want him removed from my accounts. The manager didn't argue. We can secure your profile and flag your account. Sir, step away from the counter. Darren's face went flat. You can't do this. We can, the manager said. And we are. Darren leaned in, voice dropping. You're making yourself look unstable, he whispered. Keep this up and you'll end up exactly where I said you would. Margaret's hands clenched. Then Darren straightened, turned toward the lobby and raised his voice with sudden brightness. Someone help my grandmother, he said. She's having an episode. I think she needs medical assistance. Margaret froze. Because the security guard's head snapped up. Because two people in line turned to stare. Because Darren was planning a story in real time. Vic's voice stayed calm. Ma'am, he said to the manager, call the police, right now. The manager nodded and reached for her phone. Darren stepped back satisfied, and then the glass doors opened again. Two men in dark blue uniforms walked in carrying a folded gurney. A woman with a clipboard followed them, badge clipped to her sweater. She looked straight at Margaret and smiled like this was already decided. Margaret Carter? She asked. We're here to transport you for an evaluation. Margaret's mouth went dry. She hadn't called anyone. Vic didn't raise his voice. He didn't move fast. He just stepped half a pace in front of Margaret and looked at the woman's badge. What agency? He asked. The woman's smile stayed fixed. Ma'am, we have concerns about your safety. Vic held his phone up, already recording. Name the agency, he repeated. The woman's eyes flicked to Darren, just for a blink, and Darren smiled back, calm as a man watching a signature line fill itself in. Vic kept his phone steady. Show me the order, he said. Case number. Who requested this? The woman's smile held. We received a call regarding an elderly woman in distress. I'm refusing, Margaret said louder. I do not consent to any transport. One of the men started unfolding the gurney anyway. Metal clicked, wheels locked. Vic shifted half a step so it couldn't reach her without going through him. He didn't touch anyone. Agency name, license numbers, he said. Because if you put hands on her after she said no, that's a crime. The bank manager came around the counter with her phone up. No physical contact in my lobby, she said. I've called the police. Darren's voice cut in, sharp. She needs to be evaluated. Margaret turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. You need me quiet, she said. The woman with the clipboard drew a tight breath. Ma'am, if you refuse, we can escalate this. Vic nodded once. Please do, he said, still recording. For the first time, the woman hesitated, and Darren, watching, took a slow step forward. Darren took that slow step forward like he was entering a stage. Ma'am, he said to the woman with the clipboard, voice loud enough for the whole lobby. She's been declining for months. She gets paranoid. She thinks everyone's out to get her. She refuses help. I'm just trying to keep her safe. Margaret's chest tightened as heads turned. That was the move. If he couldn't get her signature, he'd get a label. Vic didn't argue with Darren. He spoke to the woman holding the clipboard, still recording on his phone. Agency name, Vic said again, steady. Badge number, license numbers for transport. The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. We're contracted. By who? Vic cut in. She glanced at Darren, a flicker, reflex, like she was waiting for him to steer. The bank manager held her phone up. Police are en route, she said. No one is taking anyone out of this lobby without paperwork that I can verify. One of the uniformed men finished locking the gurney wheels with a sharp click. The sound hit Margaret like a door slamming. I'm refusing, Margaret said again, louder. I do not consent to transport. The woman with the clipboard inhaled, then tried to soften her tone. Margaret, honey, we're not here to hurt you. We just need you to come in for a quick evaluation. It's routine. Routine. Darren loved that word. Vic held his phone higher. What's the legal basis? He asked. Voluntary. She said no. Involuntary. Show the order. The woman's jaw tightened. There are provisions when an elderly person is a danger. Is she making threats? Vic asked. Is she holding a weapon? Is she suicidal? Or is she just refusing to sign paperwork her nephew wants? Darren's smile twitched. This is harassment, he snapped. You can't intimidate medical professionals. Vic didn't look at Darren. I'm asking for identification and authority, he said. That's not intimidation. That's accountability. The security guard stepped closer, uncertain. Ma'am, he said to the clipboard woman, do you have documentation? She patted her clipboard like it contained something important. We have an intake request. From who? The manager asked. The woman hesitated. A concerned family member. Margaret felt her blood turn cold. She looked at Darren. He didn't look away. This is your play, Margaret said. Her voice shook, but it carried. You couldn't get my signature, so you're trying to get me declared unfit. Darren lifted his hands in mock pain. Listen to her. She's delusional. Vic's tone stayed flat. Name the requesting party, he said. The woman's smile went rigid. That's confidential. It's not confidential from law enforcement, the manager said, and it's not confidential if you're trying to take her against her will. One of the uniformed men shifted, eyes flicking to the exit. The other cleared his throat. Margaret noticed their uniforms weren't like the city ambulances she'd seen. No county emblem, no fire department crest, just plain dark blue with a generic patch. Private, hired. Vic's voice dropped slightly, like a final offer. Last chance, he said. Agency name, vehicle number, paperwork, or you walk back out those doors. The woman's eyes flicked to Darren again. That was all the bank manager needed. I'm calling 911 back, she said, and did it, right there, loud enough. This is the branch on Mill Road. We have a private medical transport attempting to remove a customer without documentation. Yes. Yes, she's refusing. Yes, I want an officer and an EMS supervisor. Darren's calm finally cracked. You can't do this, he hissed at the manager. The manager didn't blink. Watch me. The clipboard woman's shoulders tensed. We can wait outside, she said, voice clipped. Let her calm down. Vic nodded. Do that. One of the uniformed men started folding the gurney back up. Metal rattled. It sounded less like authority now and more like a prop being removed from a bad play. The woman gave Margaret a look that was half warning, half anger. This could have been easy, she murmured. Margaret stared back. My life isn't your easy. The trio moved toward the doors. Darren watched them go, jaw working, eyes burning with calculation because the first attempt had failed. But he wasn't done. And then the doors opened again. A real city paramedic stepped in, red jacket, radio on his shoulder. Behind him came two police officers, not the same one from earlier. Different shift, different faces. The bank manager pointed immediately. That man, she said, indicating Darren, and that transport team. She is refusing. He's claiming she needs evaluation. The paramedic looked at Margaret first, not Darren. Ma'am, he said, voice professional, are you having chest pain? Trouble breathing? Did you call for help? No, Margaret said. I'm fine. I'm being pressured. The paramedic nodded once like he believed her because he was actually trained to read a room. One of the officers stepped toward Darren. Sir, what's your relationship? I'm her grandson, Darren said quickly. She's confused. She's being manipulated by these bikers. Vic held up his phone. I have video of the transport refusing to name their agency and looking to him for direction, he said. And I have her refusal on camera. The officer's posture changed. You recorded the interaction? Yes. Good, the officer said. He turned to the clipboard woman, who had paused near the doors like she wasn't sure whether to leave or stay. Ma'am, identify your company, she swallowed. We're contracted transport. Name, the officer repeated. Now. The woman's eyes flicked one more time toward Darren. That tiny reflex hit like a hammer. The officer's gaze sharpened. Sir, he said to Darren, step over here. Darren's smile tried to return. I'm just trying to protect my family. Step over here, the officer repeated, colder. Darren moved, but his eyes stayed on Margaret, promising her what would happen if she didn't fold. Margaret forced herself not to look away. The paramedic leaned closer to her. Ma'am, you're allowed to refuse, he said quietly. If you're oriented and not a danger, nobody can force you into an ambulance without legal paperwork. Margaret's voice came out rough. He's trying to make me look unstable, the paramedic nodded. Then we keep it simple. Tell me your name, today's date, where we are. Margaret answered, steady. She felt every eye on her, but she didn't stumble. The paramedic straightened. She's oriented, he said to the officers. No medical need. The clipboard woman opened her mouth, but one of the officers cut her off. You're done here, he said. Leave the lobby. She hesitated. The officer stepped closer. Now. She left. The gurney went with her. The second the doors shut behind that fake authority, Darren's mask slipped, just a fraction. The officer spoke to him low, out of Margaret's hearing. Darren's hands moved, pleading, then sharp, then pleading again. Then the officer turned back to Margaret. Ma'am, he said, he's not being arrested right now, but we're documenting this. We're also advising him not to contact you today. Margaret's heart sank until the officer added, and we strongly recommend you go directly to your attorney, then to court for an emergency protective order. Vic's voice was calm beside her. We're doing that, he said. Margaret looked at the manager. Can I get printed confirmation of the account freeze and the attempted wire? You can, the manager said. I'm printing it now. Minutes later, Margaret walked out with a packet of stamped bank documents in her purse and her attorney's address on a card in her hand. Across the parking lot, Darren stood by his car, phone pressed to his ear again, talking fast. This time, he wasn't calling to beg. He was calling to escalate. And as Margaret slid into her car, her own phone buzzed with a new notification, one she'd never seen before. Court alert. A petition has been filed. Her breath caught, because it wasn't a bank alert. It was the start of something legal. Margaret didn't start the engine right away. She sat with both hands on the steering wheel, staring at the notification on her phone like it might change if she blinked. Court alert. A petition has been filed. Vic leaned slightly toward her window, careful not to crowd her. What is it? Margaret held the screen up. He filed something. Vic's expression didn't spike into drama. It tightened into focus. Then we don't drive home, he said. We drive to the attorney. Margaret's throat worked. I need my medication. You need a judge before he gets one, Vic said, voice low. Home can wait. Court doesn't. The two bikes pulled in behind her as she turned out of the bank lot. She kept checking the mirror. Darren's car stayed at the far end of the parking lot, idling like a spider that didn't want to waste energy until the web moved. When she reached the next light, Darren pulled out. He didn't tailgate. He didn't honk. He just slid into the lane 2 cars behind, calm as a man who believed the paperwork was already doing the choking for him. Margaret's fingers tightened on the wheel until her knuckles went pale. Vic rode ahead, not blocking traffic, not weaving, just positioning himself where Darren couldn't slip into the space between them without making it obvious. The second biker drifted behind Margaret's car, a silent, visible bracket. Darren saw it. His jaw flexed once. Margaret took the turn toward Barrett Law and didn't look back again. Will Barrett's office was in a low brick building with faded lettering and a bell that rang too loud when you pushed the door open. Inside, it smelled like old paper and black coffee. A receptionist looked up, eyes flicking to Margaret's trembling hands, then to the vests behind her. Margaret Carter? She asked. Yes, Margaret said. Mr. Barrett is ready. The door to the inner office opened before Margaret could even sit. Will Barrett stepped out, tall, sleeves rolled, tie loosened like he'd already decided today wasn't going to be neat. He didn't stare at the patches. He didn't smile at them either. He looked straight at Margaret. Come in, he said. Now? Inside, Barrett motioned her to a chair and slid a legal pad forward. Start at the diner, he said. Short sentences. Who, what, when. Margaret tried. Her mouth kept drying out. She heard her own words like they belonged to someone else. The folder, the pen, the notary, the witness, the doctor letter, the lockbox, the bank alerts, the lockbox on the porch rail. Barrett didn't interrupt until she placed the realtor card on his desk. Lindsay Kerr, Kerr Realty Group. His eyes sharpened. This, he said, tapping the card once, is motive. Margaret blinked. He was going to sell my house. He was trying to, Barrett corrected, and he was trying to do it fast. Barrett opened his computer, clicked through screens, typed with the kind of speed that made it clear he'd done this before. Bad relatives, bad paperwork, bad urgency. Then he looked up. "The court alert," he said. "Show me." Margaret held out her phone. Barrett read it once, then twice. His face went still. "Emergency guardianship petition," he said. "Filed this morning." Margaret's stomach dropped hard. "Guardianship?" "It's worse than power of attorney," Barrett said. He kept his voice controlled, not to scare her, but because fear wasn't useful. "Power of attorney is something you sign. Guardianship is something the court imposes. If he convinces a judge you're incompetent, he doesn't need your signature. He becomes the decision maker." Margaret felt heat rise behind her eyes. "He can't do that." "He can try," Barrett said, "and the fact he filed it tells me he had a plan B ready." Barrett turned the monitor so she could see the filing summary. "He's alleging cognitive decline, self-neglect, and undue influence by dangerous associates." His eyes flicked once toward the doorway. That would be them. Vic didn't react. He stayed still, like giving the room no drama to steal. Barrett continued. "He requested an emergency pickup and evaluation." "That transport team at the bank, it was him," Margaret whispered. "Yes," Barrett said. "He tried to get you in a facility first. Once you're behind a locked door, it becomes harder to fight." Margaret's hands started shaking again. "So what do we do?" Barrett slid a blank form across the desk. "We file our own emergency motion, protective order, temporary restraining order against Darren, immediate revocation notice for any alleged authority, and we request an expedited hearing." He pointed at the bank packet in her purse. "Those bank documents are gold. Attempted wire, unauthorized changes. That's financial exploitation." He leaned forward. "Do you have a current doctor you actually see? Someone who knows you?" Margaret nodded. "Dr. Patel at Mill Road Clinic." "Good," Barrett said. "We're getting an independent competency evaluation today. Today, not tomorrow." Margaret's eyes widened. "A test?" "A conversation," Barrett corrected. "And documentation that you're oriented and capable. It neutralizes his doctor letter and his story." Margaret swallowed. "He's going to say I'm being coached." "Let him," Barrett said. "Coached doesn't change facts." Barrett stood, grabbed his coat, and started gathering papers like he'd already decided the schedule for everyone in the room. "We go to Dr. Patel first, then courthouse, then locks, and you do not go back to your house alone." Margaret's voice came thin. "He already broke in." Barrett's jaw tightened. "Then we assume he will again." As if the day needed proof, the receptionist's voice came from the hallway, tense. "Mr. Barrett? There's someone here asking for Margaret. He says he has documents to serve." Margaret's blood went cold. "No." Barrett held up one palm, steady. "Stay seated," he said. Then he stepped into the hall. Margaret heard Darren's voice immediately, smooth, controlled, loud enough to sound reasonable. "Ma'am, I'm her family," Darren was saying. "She's confused. I'm here to help her." "I have court paperwork. It's time sensitive." Barrett's voice stayed level. "You can leave it with my receptionist. You're not speaking to my client." Darren laughed lightly. "Your client," he said, like the phrase amused him. "She can't even—" "She can," Barrett cut in, and she did. There was a brief silence, then the scrape of paper on a counter. "I'll be back," Darren said softly. Not angry, certain. "This is bigger than you." Barrett returned with a packet in his hand and shut the office door behind him. "Do not read that and panic," he said. "It's what he wants." Margaret stared at the packet anyway, eyes catching words like hooks. Emergency, incapacitated, temporary appointment. Her stomach rolled. Barrett placed the packet face down. He filed. "Fine," he said. "Now we counterpunch with evidence." He looked at Vic. "How many people can you bring to a courthouse without causing a scene?" Vic answered without hesitation. "Enough to make sure she isn't alone in a hallway." Barrett nodded once. "That's all I need." He looked back at Margaret. "Here's what you're going to do," he said. "You're going to answer every question today slowly and clearly. You're going to let me speak when the legal language shows up, and you're going to keep one thing in your head. If he gets you alone, he wins. If you stay in public, he loses." Margaret's throat tightened. I don't understand how he can just take a person. He's betting on speed and shame, Barrett said. He's betting you won't fight because it's exhausting. We're going to be more exhausting. They walked out together. Margaret expected Darren to be waiting by the door, but he'd already gone. Outside, the sky looked the same as it had an hour ago, like none of this mattered to the world. Barrett led them to his car. "Dr. Patel," he said. "Now." Margaret slid into her seat and pulled the seatbelt across her chest with shaking hands. She looked down at her phone again, at the court alert, at the words that tried to turn her into a problem on paper. Then another notification popped up, plain and brutal. Home security. Alert. Front door opened. Margaret's breath stopped. She didn't have a home security system yesterday. She had one today because the locksmith had installed a temporary sensor when he changed the locks an hour ago, and it was telling her, right now, that someone had opened her front door anyway. Margaret stared at the alert until the letters turned into shapes. Home security. Alert. Front door opened. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. The air felt too thick to move through. Barrett took her phone gently, just long enough to read it. His face didn't change much, just enough for Margaret to know it was real. "How long ago?" he asked. Margaret's voice came out thin. "Just now." Barrett looked at Vic. "Do not go there," he said immediately. "Not without law enforcement." Vic nodded once. "We won't." Barrett tapped the screen. "Do you have a camera feed?" "No," Margaret said. "Just a sensor. The locksmith added it while he changed the locks." Barrett handed the phone back. "Then assume it's Darren," he said, "or someone Darren sent." Margaret felt the old helplessness try to climb up her throat. "My medicine? My papers? We already have your critical evidence," Barrett cut in, firm but not unkind. "And if there's someone inside, you walking in is exactly what he wants." He pulled out his own phone and dialed. "This is Will Barrett," he said the second someone answered. "I need a patrol unit to 1843 Juniper Lane for a suspected unlawful entry. Elder abuse/financial exploitation context. Owner is with me. She is not on scene." Margaret watched him as if he was turning the world back into something structured. Then Barrett looked at her. "Listen carefully," he said. "If Darren is inside, he's either grabbing documents you still have, planting something, or waiting for you to arrive so he can control the moment. We are not giving him that." Margaret swallowed. "But how did he open the door if I changed the locks?" Vic's voice was flat. "Because doors open more than one way." Barrett ended the call and slid the phone into his pocket. "We're still going to Dr. Patel," he said. "And then the courthouse. The break-in is evidence. We document it. But we don't let it derail what keeps you out of a facility." Margaret's hands clenched on her purse. "He's inside my house." "He wants you to feel that," Barrett said. "So you run back, alone, and he can say you're agitated and unsafe." They drove. Margaret couldn't stop staring at the road signs as if they were all pointing back to her front door. Her phone stayed in her lap, buzzing once more. Home security. Alert. Back door opened. Margaret let out a strangled sound. "Now the back door." Barrett's jaw tightened. "Good," he said, coldly practical. "That means whoever's there is moving around. Officers will catch them in the act." Vic didn't look at her phone. He looked at the mirrors. "Darren following?" he asked. Margaret checked. A sedan 3 cars behind. Same shape, same headlights. "He's there," she whispered. Vic nodded, almost to himself. "Of course he is." Barrett didn't speed up. He slowed slightly, changed lanes once, then twice, testing. The sedan matched always, not aggressively, just present. "He wants to be seen," Barrett said quietly. "He wants you to feel watched." Margaret's voice broke. "I feel watched." "Good," Barrett said, voice steady, "because we're going to make him watched back." Break. Dr. Patel's clinic sat between a pharmacy and a nail salon. The waiting room had old magazines and a muted TV that nobody watched. The receptionist recognized Margaret instantly. "Mrs. Carter, you're early. I need to see Dr. Patel today," Margaret said, forcing her voice into calm. "It's urgent." Barrett stepped in, presenting a card. "Will Barrett, attorney. We need a brief competency and orientation assessment documented in her chart. There's an emergency guardianship petition filed against her this morning." The receptionist's eyes widened. One moment. They didn't wait long. Dr. Patel came out in a white coat, brows drawn. "Margaret," he said, softening. "What's going on?" Margaret tried to speak, but her throat locked again. Barrett summarized in a clean legal line. Coercion attempt, fraudulent POA push, attempted wire transfer, emergency guardianship filing, and now an unlawful entry. Dr. Patel's face hardened. "Come in," he said. In the exam room, he pulled a chair close, not looming, not distant, just present. "Margaret," he said, "tell me your full name." "Margaret Louise Carter." "Date of birth?" she answered. "Who is the current president?" She answered without hesitation. "What did you have for breakfast?" "Toast and coffee," she said, and then, because her anger was finally stronger than her fear, "In a diner where my nephew tried to steal my life with a pen." Dr. Patel's eyes held hers. "Do you understand what power of attorney is?" "Yes," Margaret said. "It gives him authority to handle my money, my property, my medical decisions." "And did you want to sign that today?" Dr. Patel asked. "No." "Are you able to manage your daily activities?" he asked. "Yes," Margaret said. "I pay my bills. I cook. I take my medication. I asked for help after my husband died, because I was lonely, not because I was incapable." Dr. Patel nodded slowly, taking notes. "Any confusion, hallucinations, memory blackouts?" "No." "Are you a danger to yourself or others?" he asked. "No." He paused, then asked the question that mattered most in this moment. "Do you feel pressured or threatened by your nephew?" Margaret's hands tightened. "Yes." Dr. Patel didn't look surprised. He looked angry. "Okay," he said. "I'm documenting. Patient is alert, oriented ×4, demonstrates understanding of legal decisions, expresses consistent refusal, reports coercion and fear. I'm also documenting that she requests no information be shared with Darren Carter without her explicit consent." Margaret's breath came out shaky. "Can you give me a letter?" Dr. Patel nodded. "Today." He stepped out to print it, and Barrett leaned toward Margaret, voice low. "This is the shield," he said. "This keeps a judge from rubber-stamping his emergency petition." Margaret stared at the exam room door. "He broke into my house while I was here." "And we'll use that," Barrett said, "but we don't let it become panic. Panic is his currency." Dr. Patel returned with a signed letter and an additional page, clinic stamp, date, time. He handed it to Barrett like he was handing over ammunition. Barrett scanned it and nodded. "Perfect." Margaret's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a door alert. "Unknown number. Calling." Margaret's stomach dropped. She didn't answer. She let it go to voicemail. Immediately, another call, unknown number, then a text. Unknown. "This is intake. We're confirming your arrival time." Margaret felt her blood turn cold. "Intake," she whispered. Barrett took the phone and read it. His eyes narrowed. "He's still trying," he said. Vic's voice stayed calm, but it carried weight. "He wants her in a facility before a judge sees her standing upright," he said. Barrett nodded. "Exactly." Margaret's hands trembled again, not with confusion. Rage and fear braided together. "How do I stop him?" Barrett looked at her. "We stop him by getting in front of a judge today," he said, "and by making sure you never walk down a hallway alone." As if on cue, the clinic's front door opened, and the receptionist's head turned toward the waiting room with sudden tension. Because Darren walked in, not running, not shouting, smiling. He held a manila envelope in a coffee cup like he was bringing comfort. "Grandma," Darren said warmly, eyes flicking to Dr. Patel, then to Barrett, then to the vests. "There you are. I've been calling. You scared me." Margaret's heart pounded. Barrett stepped forward before she could speak. "You're not speaking to her," he said. Darren's smile widened, calm as poison. "I'm not here to fight," he said. "I'm here to help." Then he looked at Dr. Patel and said the sentence he'd been saving. "Doctor, she's being coerced by a biker gang. I need you to put her on an involuntary hold." Darren's words hung in the clinic air like a chemical smell. "Doctor," he said again, softer now, like he was offering a responsible solution. "She's being coerced by a biker gang. I need you to put her on an involuntary hold." For a second, the waiting room went too quiet. Even the muted TV seemed to shrink. Dr. Patel didn't move. He didn't look at Darren's envelope. He didn't look at the patches either. He looked at Margaret. "Margaret," he said evenly, "do you want to leave this clinic with your nephew?" "No," Margaret said. Her voice shook, but it didn't waver. Dr. Patel nodded once and turned to Darren. "An involuntary hold is not a customer request," he said. "It requires clinical criteria. It requires evidence of immediate danger to self or others." Darren's smile tightened. "She's not thinking clearly. She's paranoid. She thinks I'm stealing from her. She's refusing care. She's agitated." "She's not agitated," Dr. Patel said, still calm. "She's standing here oriented and coherent. I examined her 10 minutes ago." Darren's eyes flicked to Barrett. "Of course you did," he said, like the word examined was suspicious, "with her lawyer coaching her answers." Barrett didn't take the bait. "You're interfering with the physician-patient relationship," he said. "Leave." Darren held up the envelope. "I have paperwork," he said. "I filed for emergency guardianship. The court agrees she needs help." "The court hasn't ruled," Barrett replied. "A petition is not an order." Darren's mouth twitched. He stepped closer, trying to take space, trying to make Margaret small again. "Grandma," he said, warmer, "I'm not mad. I'm worried. Come with me. We'll get you evaluated, and then you can go home. I'll handle the details." Margaret felt her stomach twist. It was the same pitch as the diner, just wearing a medical mask. Dr. Patel's voice snapped the mask in half. "You are not her clinician," he said, "and she has already stated she is refusing." Darren exhaled, long and performative, then turned his head slightly toward the receptionist's desk. "Then I guess I have to report this," he said, loud enough for the room, "because if something happens to her and the clinic ignored concerns, that's negligence." Vic stayed still, but his presence changed. He didn't loom. He simply angled his body so Margaret was no longer the closest target. Barrett's voice dropped to Margaret, quick and practical. "Do not speak to him. Let him perform. We document." Margaret swallowed and kept her hands on her purse strap like it was the only thing tethering her to the floor. Dr. Patel turned to the receptionist. "Call security," he said, "and call the police. This man is attempting to force medical action against a competent patient." Darren's smile vanished for a half-second. "Are you kidding me?" he snapped, then immediately smoothed it back into concern. "Doctor, you're making a mistake." The receptionist's hands were already moving toward the phone. Darren lifted his own phone as if he could outrace that call. "Fine," he said, dialing. "I'll call 911 myself. I have an elderly person in crisis being threatened by gang members inside a medical clinic." Dr. Patel didn't argue with him. He turned to Margaret again. "Margaret," he said, louder now, for witnesses, "do you feel threatened by anyone here?" "Yes," Margaret said, pointing at Darren. "Only him." That sentence landed like a brick. A man in the waiting room, someone Margaret had never seen before, stood up slowly. He wasn't a patient. He had no coat, no paperwork, just a clean haircut and eyes that watched too hard. He stepped toward Darren, and Darren's posture softened, like relief. Then the man spoke. "Dr. Patel," he said, showing a badge clipped inside his jacket, "I'm with Adult Protective Services." Margaret's blood went cold. Darren's face brightened instantly. "Thank God," he said. "She needs help. She's being coerced. She's refusing evaluation." The APS worker looked at Margaret, then at the vests, then at Barrett. His expression stayed neutral, professional, hard to read. Barrett stepped forward. "I'm her attorney," he said. "We are aware of a petition filed by her nephew today. She is competent. She is refusing contact with him. We are requesting a protective order this afternoon." The APS worker nodded slightly. "Ma'am," he said to Margaret, "are you willing to speak with me privately?" Darren immediately leaned in. "She's confused," he said. "She'll say anything. She thinks I broke into her house." Margaret's jaw tightened. "You did." The APS worker raised one hand toward Darren, not aggressive, just authoritative. "Sir, step back. I'm speaking to her." Darren's eyes flashed. "I'm family. I have guardianship papers." "Petition," Barrett corrected. "Not guardianship." The APS worker's eyes cut to Barrett. "I'd like to see your documentation," he said. Barrett didn't hesitate. He pulled the bank packet out and placed it on the receptionist counter, like a stack of weights. "Unauthorized banking access changes," Barrett said. Attempted wire to escrow. Lockbox discovered on her property with a spare key and a realtor's showing schedule. She has a fresh competency note from Dr. Patel timed and signed today, and she has a police incident report from this morning regarding coercion. Dr. Patel stepped in, backing it. And I personally assessed her, he said. She is oriented and understands the decisions being discussed. The APS worker's neutral face shifted, just slightly. Less open to Darren now, more focused. Darren felt it. His calm thinned. That's not the whole story, Darren said quickly. She forgets. She wanders. She calls me crying at night. I have a doctor letter. Dr. Patel cut him off. From a clinic that doesn't exist. The APS worker's eyes sharpened. What clinic? Darren hesitated. Barrett didn't. We checked it. No listing, no address, no record. The APS worker held Darren's gaze. Sir, he said, I need your full name and date of birth. Darren's voice stayed smooth. Why? Because you've made allegations of coercion, the APS worker replied, and I'm also seeing indicators of potential financial exploitation. That changes my questions. Darren's smile flickered. This is ridiculous. The clinic door opened again. 2 uniformed officers stepped in, scanning the room. The receptionist pointed without hesitation. That man, she said, indicating Darren. He's refusing to leave and trying to force an involuntary hold. One officer approached Darren. Sir, step outside. Darren lifted his hands, eyes wide, all innocence again. I'm just trying to help my grandmother. Outside, the officer repeated, not listening to the performance. Darren looked at Margaret one last time. His expression didn't say, I'm worried. It said, you're going to regret this. As the officers guided him toward the door, Darren turned his head slightly and spoke just loud enough for Margaret to hear. You know Monday's hearing? He murmured. You won't make it. Margaret's breath caught. Barrett's head snapped up. Say that again, he said sharply. But Darren was already outside, swallowed by uniforms and daylight. Margaret stood there frozen, heart hammering, because the threat wasn't metaphorical, not with her doors being opened while she wasn't home. Not with fake transport showing up. Vic's voice came low at her shoulder. We heard him, he said. We're not letting you walk into Monday alone. Dr. Patel looked at Barrett. Do you want me to call the hospital and warn them? He asked. Barrett shook his head once. No, he said. We go straight to court and we get the order today. If we have a signed protective order before Monday, his leverage collapses. The APS worker stepped closer to Margaret, tone softer now. Ma'am, he said, I want to help you, but I need one more thing from you. Margaret swallowed. What? He looked her in the eye. Has Darren ever tried to have you taken for evaluation before today? Margaret's mouth went dry because an image hit her. An ambulance last month, parked down the street, leaving when she didn't open her door. She'd told herself it was nothing. Now she wasn't sure. Margaret stared at the APS worker, and the memory came back sharp enough to sting. Last month, she said, voice tight, an ambulance parked down the street. I thought it was for a neighbor. It sat there 10 minutes. Nobody got out. When I didn't open my door, it left. Vic's eyes narrowed. Not anger, recognition. The APS worker nodded slowly. Did anyone call you that day? Leave a voicemail? Margaret shook her head. I didn't connect it to anything. Darren had been hovering, offering help, saying I was getting worse. I thought he was worried. Barrett's voice came out cold. He was rehearsing. Dr. Patel didn't raise his voice, but the room seemed to tighten around his words. If he's attempted this before, that strengthens your claim of coercion, he said. The APS worker turned slightly, lowering his tone so the waiting room couldn't feed on it. Ma'am, I'm going to open an investigation for suspected financial exploitation, he said. That's not me taking his side. That's me doing my job. But you need court protection fast because he's already escalated to third parties. Barrett nodded once. We're going now. They moved without ceremony. No speeches, no dramatic exit, just urgency that stayed controlled. Outside, the day felt too normal. Cars idled at a light. Someone carried a grocery bag. The world didn't pause for a woman trying to keep her life. Margaret's phone buzzed again. Home security alert. Motion detected. Living room. Her hands started to shake so hard she almost dropped the phone. Barrett glanced at it. Good, he said, not because it was good, but because it was evidence. We're going to use every single one of these. Vic leaned close, voice low. Do you have anyone you trust who can meet the police at your house if they're there? Margaret swallowed. Mrs. Alvarez. Call her, Vic said. Put it on speaker. Keep it simple. Margaret dialed. Mrs. Alvarez answered on the second ring, breathless. Margaret? Are you okay? Maria, Margaret said, forcing calm. Police might be at my house soon. I'm not there. Can you step outside and watch from your porch? Don't go in. Just be a witness. Mrs. Alvarez didn't hesitate. Yes, I'll do it. Barrett was already calling again. Dispatch, he said into his phone. I need confirmation a unit is en route to 1843 Juniper. Motion alerts now indicate someone is inside. Neighbor will observe from her porch. He ended the call and looked at Margaret. Now we make sure a judge sees you upright and clear before he can paint you as confused. They drove to the courthouse, not the big dramatic courthouse people imagine, a county building with beige walls and metal detectors and a line that smelled like winter coats. The kind of place where your life gets decided between lunch breaks. Barrett walked in like he owned time. He didn't, but he acted like he did, and sometimes that mattered. At security, the guard glanced at the vests and stiffened. Vic didn't say a word. He just opened his vest slightly to show empty hands, then lifted his helmet by the strap like an offering of peace. We're here as witnesses, Barrett said. We're not here to cause trouble. The guard hesitated, then waved them through with a warning look that said he'd be watching. Good, Vic murmured. Let him. Inside, the hallway was loud with quiet things. Paper shuffling, muffled arguments, the squeak of shoes on tile. Barrett led Margaret to a clerk window. We're filing an emergency petition for protective order, he said, sliding paperwork forward. Immediate, elder abuse and financial exploitation. The clerk took one look at the stack, bank documents, Dr. Patel's competency letter, photos of the realtor lockbox, the showing schedule, and her expression changed. Not sympathy, procedure turning sharp. Have you already been served with a guardianship petition? The clerk asked. Yes, Barrett said, this morning. Then you need to request expedited hearing, the clerk replied. Barrett nodded. We are. Margaret stood still, breathing shallowly. Every time someone in the hall raised their voice, her shoulders jumped. Vic stayed close but not touching her. Just present. A wall that didn't need to move to be a wall. Then Barrett's phone buzzed. He glanced down and his jaw tightened. He showed the screen to Margaret. Dispatch. Unit on scene. Front door forced. Suspect fled out back. Margaret's breath caught. He ran. Barrett's eyes stayed hard. He wanted to be inside long enough to do something, he said. Plant something, steal something, or make sure you knew he could. Margaret's stomach turned. What did he do? Barrett's phone buzzed again. Dispatch. Neighbor confirms male matching description left property. Vehicle unknown. Mrs. Alvarez's name flashed on Margaret's phone right after. Margaret answered, voice shaking. Maria! He was in your house, Mrs. Alvarez blurted. I saw him through your window. He went out the back door like he owned the place. Then a car picked him up from the alley. Not his car. A dark SUV. A dark SUV. Margaret looked at Vic. Vic's expression didn't change much, but something in his eyes tightened. He's not alone, Vic said quietly. Barrett nodded. And now it's not just family drama, it's coordinated. Margaret's palms went damp. What did he take? I don't know yet, Mrs. Alvarez said, voice trembling. But, Margaret, there was another man with him earlier, the windbreaker guy. He was carrying a case, like tools. Barrett's voice went colder. That's burglary. The clerk called Barrett's name. They stepped into a small courtroom that didn't feel like a courtroom, more like an office with a bench. A judge sat behind it, glasses low, expression already tired. Barrett spoke first, concise and sharp. Your Honor, we're requesting an immediate temporary protective order and restraining order against Darren Carter and an expedited hearing on his emergency guardianship petition. We have documented attempted financial exploitation, coercion, and ongoing unlawful entry. He handed the judge the competency letter from Dr. Patel. The judge read it. The judge looked up at Margaret. "Mrs. Carter," she said, voice even, "do you understand why you are here?" "Yes," Margaret answered. "My nephew is trying to take control of my life, my money, my home, my medical decisions." "Do you wish to have him make those decisions for you?" the judge asked. "No." "Do you feel safe around him?" the judge asked. "No," Margaret said, and felt her voice solidify on the word. "I don't." The judge looked at the bank packet, the lockbox photos, the showing schedule, the attempted wire. Her expression sharpened, then the courtroom door opened. Darren walked in, not rushing, not frantic, calm. He wore a clean-collared shirt now, like he'd changed costumes. His hair was perfect. He carried a folder and a look of wounded concern. Behind him, 2 steps back, was the man in the windbreaker. Margaret's chest seized. Vic shifted half a step, not blocking Darren, just repositioning so Margaret was no longer in a straight line with him. Barrett's voice snapped. "Your Honor, he's been told not to contact her today." The judge's eyes flicked to Darren. "Mr. Carter," she said, tone flat, "this is an emergency protective order hearing. Why are you here?" Darren smiled, gentle, rehearsed. "Because I love my grandmother," he said, "and she's being manipulated by dangerous people. I filed for guardianship because she's declining and refusing care." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You filed this morning," she said, "and since then there's been an attempted wire transfer from her account to escrow. How do you explain that?" Darren didn't blink. "I can't," he said softly. "Because I didn't do it. She's confused. She forgets passwords. She clicks things." Barrett held up his hand. "Your Honor, the bank documented that a new email was added to her profile. That email does not belong to Mrs. Carter. It belongs to a Darren Carter alias." He slid the page forward. Darren's smile twitched. The judge's gaze sharpened as she read. Darren pivoted. "She's being coached," he said, voice tightening just enough to sound pained. "Those bikers are intimidating her. I'm scared for her. She's terrified to say the truth." The judge looked at Margaret. "Mrs. Carter, are you afraid to speak freely right now?" Margaret felt every eye in the room. She looked at Darren. She looked at the windbreaker man. She looked at the judge. And she said, clear as she could, "I'm afraid of my nephew." Darren's expression cracked for a fraction of a second, then reset. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Carter," she said, "step back from her, right now." Darren's jaw flexed. He complied, but his eyes stayed locked on Margaret like a hand that didn't need to touch to squeeze. The judge turned to Barrett. "I'm issuing a temporary protective order," she said. "No contact, no approach. He is to stay away from her residence. Hearing on the guardianship petition will be expedited." Relief hit Margaret so hard her knees went weak. Barrett wasn't finished. "Your Honor," he said, "we also have an active unlawful entry at her home today while she was with me and her physician. Police were dispatched. Neighbor witnessed the suspect flee. We believe Mr. Carter's involved." Darren's smile faded. "That's absurd," he said sharply. "I've been—" "Quiet," the judge cut him off. One word, final. The judge signed. The sound of the pen on paper was small, but it felt like a door locking. As the clerk stamped copies, Darren leaned toward the windbreaker man and murmured something Margaret couldn't hear. The windbreaker man nodded once, eyes flat. Barrett took the stamped order and placed it in Margaret's hands like it was something fragile and holy. "Keep it on you," he said. "Copies everywhere. Door, purse, car." Margaret nodded, breathing hard. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Darren moved fast, too fast for the first time all day. He cut around a bench and appeared in front of Margaret like he'd been waiting for this exact moment in this exact corridor where the cameras were spaced far apart and the crowd flowed like a river you could hide inside. He held out a single sheet of paper and a pen, his voice dropping into that intimate whisper that had always worked at home. "Just sign here, Grandma," he said, smiling like the judge's ink meant nothing. "It's just an acknowledgement. Then I'll leave you alone." Margaret froze. Barrett started forward, then stopped when he saw something in Darren's other hand. Not a weapon. A phone, screen lit, camera pointed at Margaret's face like a trap. Darren's smile widened and he whispered, "Say no, and I'll tell them you're unstable. Say yes, and this all ends." Margaret's mouth went dry as Darren inched the pen closer, closer, until the tip hovered just above the paper and his voice slid into her ear like a blade. "Sign it, or you're not making it to Monday." Margaret couldn't breathe. The hallway noise, shoes on tile, muffled voices, a copy machine spitting out paper, kept moving like normal life, while Darren held her in a private cage made of inches and whispers. The pen hovered over the paper. "Just sign here, Grandma," Darren repeated, and the way he said it wasn't a request. It was a switch he expected her to flip. Margaret's eyes dropped to the page. It wasn't the POA. It was shorter, cleaner. The kind of thing you could sign without reading because it looked harmless. Acknowledgement of receipt, acknowledgement of understanding, acknowledgement of voluntary consent, words designed to infect everything that happened before. Barrett stepped forward, voice sharp. "Don't you touch her." Darren's smile widened. "I'm not touching her," he murmured, lifting the paper just enough to show his hands were clean. "She's choosing." Vic didn't move fast. He moved into position, quietly, one step, then another, not blocking Darren like a bouncer, blocking him like a witness. Darren's phone stayed pointed at Margaret's face, the red recording dot on the screen bright as a threat. "Say no," Darren whispered to her, "and I'll show them this. I'll tell them you're unstable. I'll tell them you're being controlled. Say yes, and this ends." Margaret's throat tightened. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. She wanted to sign just to make him stop being close. And that was exactly why he was doing it here, in this corridor, where every step felt public and every word felt invisible. Barrett's voice went low, controlled. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "look at me." Margaret forced her eyes off the paper and met Barrett's. "Do not respond to him," Barrett said. "Respond to me. Are you willing to sign anything right now?" "No," Margaret whispered. Louder, Barrett said, not to embarrass her, to make the hallway hear. "So the record exists without his phone." Margaret swallowed, and the fear turned into heat. "No," she said. Darren's eyes flashed. His smile stayed. "See," he said softly, raising the phone slightly. Agitated, confused, refusing reasonable steps. Vic's voice cut in, calm as ice. "You're recording?" he asked Darren. "Of course," Darren said. "I need protection from liars." Vic nodded once and lifted his own phone, already recording. "Good," he said. "So are we." Darren's smile tightened. "Put that away." Vic didn't. He angled the lens so Darren's paper and pen were clearly visible. "Tell the camera what you're asking her to sign," Vic said. Darren's jaw flexed. "It's nothing." "Then say it," Vic replied, still calm. Darren's eyes darted down the hall, toward the courtroom door, toward the bailiff station, toward the clerks. He didn't like witnesses when he couldn't control them. Barrett stepped closer, just enough to claim space. "You have a protective order," he said to Darren. "You're violating it by approaching her." Darren's smile didn't drop. "I'm leaving," he said, and leaned in again, close enough that only Margaret could hear the last line of poison. "Monday," he whispered. "You won't make it." Margaret's stomach turned. And then, because Darren couldn't resist having the last move, he reached out, not to touch Margaret, but to touch the edge of her protective order packet in her hand. Just a fingertip, like a test. Margaret flinched. It was tiny, almost nothing, but it was contact. The bailiff saw it. "Hey!" the bailiff called out, stepping forward. "Sir, back up!" Darren straightened immediately, palms up. "I didn't touch her," he said, voice suddenly loud, suddenly righteous. "I'm her family. I'm trying to communicate." "You're under a no-contact order," the bailiff said, closing distance. "Step away from her, now." Darren's eyes flicked to the windbreaker man, who had been standing off to the side like furniture. The windbreaker man moved a half step, then stopped when Vic turned his head and met his eyes. Not a threat. A clear message. "You are seen." Darren's smile thinned to a line. "Fine," he said, stepping back. "I'm done." He turned as if to walk away. Then he flicked his wrist and let the paper drift down at Margaret's feet like litter, like he wanted her to pick it up, like he wanted her to feel the pull of fixing what he broke. Margaret didn't bend. Barrett didn't either. He raised his voice, crisp and unmistakable. "Bailiff," he said, "this man just approached my client, produced a document and pen, and attempted to pressure her into signing while recording her. That is a direct violation of the protective order issued minutes ago. The bailiff's face hardened. "Sir," he said to Darren, "turn around." Darren's posture stiffened. "Are you serious?" "Turn around," the bailiff repeated. Darren looked around like he expected someone to rescue him. Nobody did. The hallway had gone quiet in that special way where strangers pretend not to stare while staring anyway. The bailiff took Darren's arm, not yanking, not violent, and guided him toward a side door. Darren's voice rose. "This is insane. She's being manipulated." Barrett didn't argue. He handed Vic his phone without looking away from Darren. "Send that video to me," he murmured. "Now." Vic nodded and did it. Margaret stood frozen, staring at the spot where Darren had been. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Then her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Unknown. "You're brave in public. Let's see you at home." Margaret's breath hitched. Barrett read it over her shoulder and his face turned cold. "Okay," he said quietly. "Now it's explicit." He turned to the bailiff who was coming back down the hall. "We need this added to the record," he said. "And we need police escort to her residence to secure the property. There was already unlawful entry today." The bailiff nodded once, no longer neutral. "Wait here," he said. "I'm calling a deputy." Vic's voice came low at Margaret's side. "You did right," he said. "You didn't sign." Margaret's throat worked. "He's going to come back." Vic looked down the hallway where Darren had disappeared. "Then we make sure when he does," he said. "He walks into cameras, badges, and witnesses." A deputy arrived minutes later, bigger, older, calmer. He listened to Barrett for 30 seconds, read the protective order, and nodded. "We'll escort you," he said to Margaret, "and we'll make contact at your residence." Margaret clutched the stamped order like it was the only solid thing in the world. As they moved toward the exit, her phone buzzed again, this time an email notification. Subject: Final notice, closing schedule, confirmed. Margaret felt her knees go weak. Because someone was still trying to sell her house, even after the judge signed, even after Darren was pulled away. And the clock, whatever deadline he was racing, was still ticking. The deputy didn't let Margaret walk out first. He walked ahead, scanning the courthouse steps, the parking lot, the cars that sat too long with engines running. Barrett stayed at Margaret's left shoulder, Vic at her right, close enough that Darren's shadow couldn't slip between them. Margaret's phone buzzed again, but she didn't look. She couldn't take another line of text that tried to turn her home into a countdown. "Eyes up," Barrett said quietly. "We're getting you to the house, we're securing it, and then we shut down every avenue he's been using." They drove in a small convoy, deputy in front, Margaret behind, bikes following at a respectful distance. Nobody raced, nobody performed. The point wasn't intimidation, the point was that she was not alone. When Juniper Lane came into view, Margaret's stomach tightened. The street looked normal, too normal. Kids' bikes in driveways, a dog barking behind a fence, Mrs. Alvarez standing on her porch like a sentry, arms folded against the cold. The deputy pulled up first and killed his lights. He didn't rush to the door. He did what Darren had never expected the world to do for Margaret. He treated her safety like procedure. "Stay in the car until I tell you," he said. Margaret nodded. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. The deputy walked to the front door and checked it. The lock was scuffed. The frame showed a fresh bite of splintered wood near the latch. He turned back and raised his hand, signaling. Then he motioned for Margaret and Barrett to step out. Vic didn't go in. He stayed on the walk, eyes on the street, on the corners, on the places a person could appear and turn family back into a weapon. Inside, the house felt violated in a way Margaret couldn't explain. Not chaos. Darren wasn't messy. He was surgical. Drawers half open. A chair moved 2 inches. Papers shifted just enough to make her feel crazy. The deputy walked room to room. "Any firearms?" he asked. "No," Margaret said. "Any missing valuables?" he asked. "My documents," Margaret replied. "My checkbook and a deed envelope." Barrett moved through the house without touching anything, using his eyes like they were cameras. He stopped at the hall closet and pointed. "There," he said. On the carpet near the closet door, barely visible unless you knew to look, was a thin strip of clear tape, fresh, like someone had taped something and peeled it off in a hurry. Darren hadn't been searching anymore. He'd been placing. The deputy crouched. We'll get CSI to dust and collect, he said, pulling out his own phone to document. Nobody touches anything. Margaret stepped into the living room and froze. On the coffee table was a new folder, bright white, deliberately clean against her worn wood. It hadn't been there earlier. Barrett's face went flat. Don't open it, he warned. The deputy picked it up with gloved hands from his kit, flipped it over without touching the inside, and read the label Darren had written in neat block letters. Margaret Carter. Urgent. Margaret's skin prickled. He wants me to panic. He wants you to sign, Barrett said. The deputy bagged the folder like evidence. This is good, he said. This is him coming back after a no-contact order. This is him acting like the law doesn't apply to him. Mrs. Alvarez's voice floated from the doorway. He came by earlier, she said, shaking. Not alone. That SUV came back. They parked in the alley again. They were in and out fast. The deputy's head turned. You saw the SUV twice? Yes, Mrs. Alvarez said. Dark, tinted windows, no plates I could see. Vic's eyes narrowed at the mention of the alley. He's using someone else's car so he can deny being there, he said. Barrett nodded. And he's still trying to close. Margaret's phone buzzed again. Barrett held up a hand. Let me see the email, he said. Margaret handed him the phone with shaking fingers. Barrett opened it, scanned it once, then twice, and his mouth tightened. Closing schedule confirmed, he read aloud. This isn't Darren sending threats. This is an actual pipeline still running. He looked at Margaret. This means the realtor and the escrow company were moving forward based on the assumption he'd get authority. Margaret's voice cracked. Can they do it without me? Not legally, Barrett said, but not legally doesn't stop paperwork from moving until someone slams the door on it. Barrett turned to the deputy. I need an incident number for today's unlawful entry, he said, and I need to attach it to the protective order file immediately. You'll have it, the deputy said. Barrett stepped into the kitchen and started making calls with the same cold efficiency Darren had used, only Barrett used it to protect, not strip. First, the realtor on the card. Lindsay Kerr, a woman answered, bright and rushed. This is Will Barrett, Barrett said, voice controlled. You are to cease all activity regarding 1843 Juniper Lane immediately. The homeowner is present. There's a protective order. Any showing schedule, listing attempt, lockbox placement, or document submission tied to Darren Carter is unauthorized. Consider this formal notice. A pause. I was told he had authority. You were told wrong, Barrett cut in. And now you have notice. Remove the lockbox record from your system. Provide the name of the title company and escrow account associated with your closing schedule. Now. The realtor's tone changed, fear sliding in. It's with Northridge Title. Barrett wrote it down. You will email me every document you have involving this property and Darren Carter, he said, immediately. He ended the call and dialed the title company. Margaret watched him like he was building a wall out of words. While Barrett talked, the deputy walked Margaret to the front door and pointed to the latch. We're going to have a unit sit in the area tonight, he said, and if he returns, you do not engage. You call, you show the protective order, we handle it. Margaret nodded, throat tight. He keeps saying Monday, she whispered. The judge expedited the hearing, Barrett said, hanging up. And now we've got documented threats, documented unlawful entry after service, and documentation that he attempted to use third parties to force a hold. His case is collapsing. Vic stayed at the threshold, eyes outward. But he's still dangerous, he said. Yes, the deputy agreed, because people who lose control sometimes try to regain it with chaos. Barrett turned back to Margaret. Here's what happens next, he said. Tonight you do not sleep here alone. You go somewhere safe. A friend, a hotel, anywhere with cameras. Tomorrow morning we go back to court with this new incident report and the texts. We request an immediate enforcement order, and we ask the judge to appoint an independent guardian ad litem if needed, someone who isn't Darren. Margaret's hands trembled. I don't have anyone. Vic's voice stayed level. You do for tonight, he said. We'll make sure you get somewhere safe. Margaret looked at him, swallowed, then nodded once, because that word, we, was what she hadn't had in years. They moved her out like a plan. Deputy walked her to the car. Mrs. Alvarez promised to stay visible. Barrett held the protective order copies, and Vic's guys spaced out so no one could slide in close on the street. At a small, well-lit hotel near the highway, Margaret checked in under her own name with the deputy watching the lobby and Barrett making sure the front desk understood. No calls through, no room number given out. Only when the room door clicked shut behind her did Margaret finally let her knees sink onto the edge of the bed. The silence was loud. Barrett stood near the doorway, careful not to crowd. He held out his hand. "Your phone," he said. "We're changing every password, email, bank, utilities, anything he could use." Margaret handed it over. While Barrett worked, Vic remained outside the room with the deputy, not as a guard, not as a threat, just as a presence that made Darren's kind of confidence expire. An hour later, Barrett placed the phone back in Margaret's hands. "It's done," he said. "New passwords, two-factor authentication, bank flagged, title company notified with a copy of the protective order, realtor on notice, a PS investigation opened, police incident number attached to your file. And Monday's hearing is no longer about whether you're declining. It's about why he tried to sell your house and why he keeps entering it." Margaret stared at the screen, seeing normal notifications again. Weather, a pharmacy reminder, tiny, boring things that felt like survival. Barrett's voice softened slightly. "You did the hardest part," he said. "You said no when it was easier to say yes." Margaret's throat tightened. "I thought I was going to disappear," she whispered, "like people disappear when paperwork gets signed." Vic's voice came from the doorway, steady. "Not today," he said. Margaret looked up at him, and for the first time all day, her fear didn't own her face. "What do I owe you?" she asked, because that's how the world usually worked. Vic shook his head once. "Nothing," he said. "You asked for help. That's it." Margaret stared at her hands, the same hands that had almost signed away everything in a diner booth. Then she spoke, and her voice held. "I spent years thinking being alone was normal," she said, "that it was what I deserved because I was old and inconvenient. And today, strangers sat down with me so I could say no out loud." Barrett tucked the protective order copy into a folder for her like he was putting her life back into order. Vic nodded toward the hallway. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we finish the legal part." Margaret's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She was too tired, too angry, too alive. She lay back on the bed and listened to the hallway sounds, distant footsteps, an elevator ding, proof that the world was still moving and she was still in it. Her phone buzzed one last time. Not a threat. A simple text from Mrs. Alvarez. "Good night, Margaret. I'm glad you're safe." Margaret stared at it, and the tight knot in her chest loosened by a fraction. Outside, the parking lot lights hummed, steady and bright. And for the first time in a long time, the night didn't feel like something that belonged to someone else.